Where do you look at Zoom or YouTube?
YouTube. It's just coming up to 6 o'clock, so it's time for our second weekly live stream, which is based on the early 19th century European long case clock that you can see here, taken partly disassembled. And last week we talked quite a lot about the approach, the kind of bit about the sort of administrative side of things, but mainly about our practice in terms of when we have an object like this, where do we go with it? You know, what's our intended outcome, how we're going to manage that, gather in some data and all that kind of stuff. So I won't dwell on that too much this week, because as much as that stuff is always under review, we really get it out of the way at the beginning, and it's in the back of our mind, because now we are slowly moving towards thinking about the repair of this clock. So this clock here, you may have seen if you go to our Instagram page, we've put the preliminary images there. So please visit that and let us know in the live chat what you think, which is somewhere here on YouTube. And yeah, let's start that approach. Now we've kind of decided where we want to end up. Of course, that final position will be dictated to a degree by the objectives that go along, what we discover, and also if there are any other stakeholders involved, and the stakeholders are you people. So we may well change tack a little bit, but we're broadly returning this object to working order. Now, with a clock like this, I know some people, they deal with the whole thing. So they might do some dial restoration, they might do the case, the mechanism, the whole 9 yards, as it were. In this case, I'm going to pretty much leave the dial as it is. The case, we commented last week, needs a couple of veneers gluing down and things, and maybe some other work which we might tackle ourselves. But what I'm getting at is the fact that if you're doing this commercially in particular, we want to get to that point at the end where everything comes together in some kind of beautiful state of alignment. And as tempting as it is to dive straight in with the movement, that for me, and everybody has their own way of doing it, that for me raises a problem. And the problem is that if you get the movement done first, then inevitably, or almost inevitably, certainly in my case, you kind of trick yourself into thinking that the clock's fixed. I've been in that position working with others, in particular, where they've said the clock's done because the movement is ticking. It might be on a test stand or something like that, which is not something I'm particularly keen on. We might have to go down that route with a long case clock. But it never fails to surprise me how much time everything else takes. And that might be working on the pendulum, it might be working on the dial, it might be working on the date work behind the dial, the hands, the winding crank, vacuuming out the case, whatever it is. So what I prefer to do is to do all that stuff first. And it's a bit like, you know, eating your greens before having your pudding, as it were, because it's a really lovely feeling for me, kind of psychologically. The minute I finish the movement, the thing is basically finished. We can put it together and get it on test. Whereas if you finish the movement and then you've got to start all those other things, then there's a chance that the movement is going to get dusty. It's going to be on a test stand, which is never satisfactory. you might then have a client waiting, and then you think, I didn't realize that X, Y, and Z, and the whole thing gets delayed. So my personal preference is to do all the other stuff first. And it doesn't really matter where we start, because we're going to clean the weights, the pendulum. The pendulum's broken, so it needs a repair. We're going to clean the seat board. Don't really mind where we begin, other than I'm going to be slightly hypocritical here. No change there, because last week in the live chat, we had a question about the false plate. So this mechanism there, bit of metal on the front of the movement on these clocks that separates or joins the dial and the movement together. Just a little bit of expanding on that point is that normally on a clock, you've got the dial with little pegs on the back called dial feet, which plug into holes drilled in the front of the movement. On this kind of clock anyway, sometimes the dial's fixed to the case and the movement's separate. And in the instance of these early 19th century clocks, then typically there's an additional piece of material, in this case a cast iron false plate, between those two. And it basically allowed the manufacture of the movements to take place and the manufacture of the dials to take place kind of independently. And then the two things were brought together, and this false plate did the job of you being able to join them together. Okay, so as I'm working today, I'm going to be taking more photographs, and of course, I'm going to be taking more notes. Now, I'm not going to bore you with that stuff too much this week, because we kind of dealt with it last week. You will see things that need to go on our list of jobs to be done, and so on. So again, like last week, the images we take, I'll put them on Instagram as we kind of go along. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to get that false plate off the clock. So I'll bring it across to the bench, and we will get started. Just move that. So today we're going to be starting some cleaning. And if you go to our How to Repair Pendulum Clocks YouTube site, the regular one, you'll see that we did a video on gloves. So there are three kinds of gloves that we tend to use when handling clocks. One is the handling, these just kind of regular, where are we? I'll put them under there, you can see them. Regular disposable nitrile gloves, and these have a double function. One is to prevent your fingerprints going on the object, which is really important, and two, in this case, because the clock is pretty grubby, it's to keep our hands relatively clean. So that's our kind of general go-to nitrile glove. The second type we use is again a nitrile. This is, just zoom out a wee bit. This is an Ansel make, and it's basically the same thing, but these are slightly heavier duty, as you can see in the name here, Touch and Tough. So these are what I tend to use when I'm cleaning, because they're kind of a bit more puncture resistant. And then thirdly, we've got these Ansel nitrile gloves, which are heavier duty again. So they're also used in cleaning, but of course that you don't get the same dexterity with those gloves. Okay. So here's our movement. Just move out a little bit. Right, here's our movement. Now, as I said, I wouldn't normally start here or begin here, but there was this question about the false plate. So I thought, why not? Let's get this off and we can see who the maker of the false plate is. Now you can see I'm holding the movement up here with my hand, and that's because on the back, is the crutch. And as much as the crutch is already bent and broken, I don't actually want to damage it anymore. So what we can do is I made up some blocks like this. They're just wood, and a bit like the engineering blocks, which are called 3-2-1 blocks. So they're 3 inches by 2 inches by 1 inch, and they're incredibly useful for this kind of thing. So it might be that we can lean. No, we can't actually. Might have to take the pallets out. That seems reasonably safe for the time being. Okay, so we've done our photographs. We're going to take our false plate off so we can do some more photographs and then wash the thing. The false plate, just before we do that, little kind of interesting point here is it occurred to me, some of these clocks in this period, you'll find that the dial and the movement and maybe even the case are associated. So at some point in the history of the object, they have been swapped around. And that may be the case here. It's really difficult to tell with these false plates because often the holes are kind of roughly made and elongated or something. But actually, here we've got another couple of clues. Now I've fitted the dial, and the dial lines up really well with the winding apertures and the center, this clock, and the seconds, subsidiary seconds as well. However, when we look, I might actually just, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just temporarily take the pallets out, then we can lay it down and we can look at the motion work. So I'm going to get a screwdriver. Over there?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'll let you know.
Sorry?
I'll let you know.
So got our screwdriver. The live chat is up and running. So thank you to team How to Repair Pendulum Clocks. So any questions, then fire them away. Now with this clock, as you can see, it's kind of a bit rusty. So I'm slightly reluctant to just take these screws straight out. So what you could do is put a bit of penetrating oil on there or paraffin or something like that. But let's just give them a whiz and see how tight they are. Yeah, they're not too bad at all. Now, with these screws, they have a tapered slot or a V-shaped slot. If you work on more modern clocks, which we do with the Smith's Enfield clock, those screws are made with a slitting saw, so they are parallel-sided slots. These screws on 19th, 18th, and earlier clocks are a V-shaped slot. So what you often have to do is to modify your screwdriver by filing it to fit the slot. I can see here there are some burrs on those slots, on the screw slots already. So we'll tap those back down later in the program. But let's just get this back cock off so we can lay the clock down nice and neat. In fact, this screwdriver, as you can see there, is a little bit wide. So I could either file this down or go find one that's a bit thinner. Wouldn't quite normally do it at this angle. It's a little bit tricky filming and undoing the screws at the same time. But anyway. We are. And let's lift the pallets out. Now, actually here it's quite interesting because the front pallet arbor bearing is actually kind of so rusty or dirty that it's quite tight in the hole. So we just work that out. And then we have our pallets, which are a really nice shape. Beautiful. Very nice. I'm going to be putting those back in later on. So this is just so we can put the movement on its back. So we can lay that down. Now, this is, I'm putting it down on a piece of card, which is over lino on the bench top. We might put a bit of plastisort or something down there, a bit of closed cell foam just to protect it, to stop it from getting scratched or anything. So anyway, what I wanted to talk about was this. Let me just see here. You can see there. There's a post look for a 24-hour wheel. And there's also a spring here for a date wheel. Another's clock does have a date wheel. It's driven from the hour pipe. And when we look, you just see in there, when we look at the, quite a lot of dirt and dust on it, but when we look in there, we can see there's a wheel that would have driven the 24-hour wheel. So either this functionality on this clock, you can see here, look, the other pin that drives the date wheel that's there. So either this clock never had that functionality, as in the movement had both options and only one was used, or it's associated with the dial that it has. We'll probably be able to see more of that when we get the thing apart later on, to see if there are any witness marks where these components have been used. If they have, then that'll be kind of interesting. And if not, that'll also be interesting. So there we are. Right. We want to get our false plate off now. So this cropped up on Open Clock Club of how you get these pins out. Now, again, like those screws, if they're really rusty or really stuck in the holes, then what you might want to do is to put a bit of penetrating oil or paraffin or something like that, maybe 24 hours before you get them out. Now, the question here is whether we're going to keep these pins, whether pins are a consumable. Now, last week, we decided that our weight lines were, in fact, a consumable. We cut them off, as you can see. In fact, because they're still getting in the way, I'm going to cut a little bit more off. And the same applies to the pins, really. Now, I'm going to keep the pins for the time being. So I'm going to put them in a little mini zip bag thing and label them, and then make a decision later as to whether I straighten them and refit them or whether I put them back in again. Now, if you are taking apart a more complicated object, the good thing about these clocks is that there are relatively few parts. So it's kind of difficult to get the wrong thing in the wrong place. But with screws, for instance, you might actually want to, particularly for beginners, you might actually want to make a record of which screw goes in which place. And I'll just show you a little top tip for that, but I'm going to do it with the steady pins. So what I do is just get a bit of card. An old business card is a really good place. It's about the perfect size and the perfect shape. And we put our reference number for our clock, whatever it is, on the top here. And then what I usually do is, if this is the false plate, just a little. Last week, we talked quite a lot about object numbers and part numbers and part numbers of part numbers. Another point here, when you're describing an object like this, you are the object. So people often get mixed up, and I've done it many times, between which is right and left. And people often say, well, is it the clock's right and left? And the answer is yes. So for instance, in this case, in this instance, this would be the right-hand side. This would be the left-hand side. This is the front and this is the back. And we describe this as proper, as in proper right, proper left, proper front, proper back. And that tells another person in future that you were thinking of the orientation as the object itself. So what I do here is do a little drawing like this. And then, so this is right and this is left, proper right, proper left. And so we've got we've got 2 steady pins down the bottom, 2 taper pins down the bottom, sorry, and 1 up the top. And if you just take a scalpel or craft knife or something like this, rather than punching a hole in the card, if you make a little cross with your scalpel like this, without cutting your finger, that will hold the pin or the screw really well, and you won't lose it. This, by the way, the cleaning we're going to do today, top tips like this, are all in our book, volume 1 of how to repair pendulum clocks. There's a whole lot in there that may be of interest if you're getting started in horology. So we've made a little card, which means that at least I know that those pins or those screws will go back in the same place. That's not to say, of course, particularly with screws, that they're in the right place. You've got to be very mindful of the length of screws. Often in clocks like this, the screws are made to length. And there's no guarantee, of course, that the person who worked on it before put them in the right place. So you have to keep an open mind about that. So let's take out this lower proper right steady pin here, taper pin, sorry. Now, you can just see, we can get hold of the pin there. Now, sometimes what you can do here is to knock the pin through from the other side of the movement. So tap it out with a piece of brass or something like this. Now, I don't think I'm going to refit these pins. I wouldn't normally want to mark anything. But in this case, what I'm going to do is to just see if the pin, protecting the plate with a bit of card, I'm just going to see if we can get the pin out. And there we are. Oh, sorry, that wasn't actually on the camera, was it? So there we are. There's our first pin out. So that's the proper right side. So that goes in there. And you can see that little cross holds the pin really well. So let's get the top one out. This time I'll try and do it so you can actually see. Again, using our piece of card to protect the plate. There we are. The pins are not that tight here, so it's not a big problem. So that's the top one. There we go. And then let's move over to the proper left-hand side. Remember, the reason we're doing this is so we can look at the false plate, and we'll get that cleaned as the evening goes on. And there we are. So our third pin is out without any trauma. I don't know whether you can see on the camera, but there's no marking or gouging of the edge of the plate there. There is, of course, a little bit of a mark on the pin, which in this case is brass by the look of it, which is interesting. Normally, iron pins in clocks and brass pins in watches, like pocket watches. Anyway, there we go. So more parts for us to photograph, and let's just lift the false plate away. Again, it's a bit rusty and it's quite a bit dirty. So there we go. So the all-important reveal on another screw somewhere. The all-important reveal on the maker of this false plate. Let's have a little look. So you can just about make out down here that it says Birmingham. You can see that on the camera or not. So it's a Birmingham make, cast iron. And I'm not that familiar with the with these makers. Maybe somebody in the live chat knows. Anybody out there? I'm going to get an eyeglass so I can have a closer look. Can you hear that? Nobody said you can't hear stuff. You can. I haven't checked that the sound's on.
Right.
You want to check? Yeah. Please. Yeah, great. So you have to. I still can't read it. Anyway, I really don't know much about these clocks. I'm sure there'll be somebody out there who can. It looks like it's W-I-L. It's not Wilson. Wilkes. W-I-L-K-E-S. Something like that. We might be able to see when we've got it a bit more scrubbed up. So apologies for that. I'm sure there is somebody watching this and they're shouting at the camera going, it's Wilkes or whatever it is. But anyway, and we've got our mouse there. What's that doing? Absolutely no idea. Anyway, there we go. So there's our cast iron false plate, and you can see it's a little bit rusty. I'm not particularly fussed about this this rust. It's a bit dirty, as you can see, yucky. So what we're going to do is we're going to wash this. Now, again, in our book, I'll just zoom down, get rid of the camera, and it's not Hughes, is it? No. I don't know who it is. In our book, How to Repair Pendulum Clocks, Volume 1, we go through the whole process of what we describe as cleaning. So again, I won't bore you with the process, but I think a lot of what in horology is described as cleaning is actually refinishing, whether that's mechanically or chemically. Now, I'm not going to get in the whys or wherefores of that here because I'm just going to get on with the project. It's going to take long enough as it is. So what I'm basically doing is washing the parts, the metal parts, in mineral spirits. I'm actually going to use paraffin, just regular paraffin that you buy from the DIY shop. In our book, we talk about using white spirits. If you want something that's more controlled, a product that you know what's in it a little bit more, you could use GPR, which is general purpose reagent grade, which is a bit more expensive, or you can use the proprietary equivalent, such as L&R number 3 watch rinsing solution, which is not exactly the same thing, but it's basically mineral spirit. So what we want there is, obviously, we want to get rid of the dust and spiders' webs and things, and we want to get rid of old oil and contaminants like that, and nothing else really. What we'll find with this is that most of that stuff will just kind of fall off. Now, when we come to talking about cleaning, of course, if you use white spirits, then you must respect health and safety in the handling, storage, and disposal of these chemicals. If you go online, one really useful top tip, which you may not be aware of, is if you go to Google or wherever your search engine is and type in the product you want to find out, then type the letters MSDS, Manufacturer's Safety Data Sheet, MSDS, you'll come up with these have to be provided by law. You'll find a lot of information there about the product that you are buying, about its handling, about its use, and so on. So somewhere here, we have it's Wilkes. Thank you, live chat. So that's WILKES?
Yeah.
Wilkes.
1815 to 1830.
Thank you very much. The power of the internet and our amazing Facebook followers. So thank you for that. And what's the second? There are two names there. Raya, R-A something. Can't make it out. Wilkes. You're right, it's Wilkes. I can see it now. So what we've got here are some polypropylene trays that we're going to do our washing in. That. And as I said, we're going to just wash the thing in paraffin. Now, this is quite dirty, if you want to call it that, dusty, whatever. So we'll probably have to do two a wash and a rinse. If you are cleaning watches, for instance, often there's two rinses, so a wash and two rinses, or even three. I think modern watch cleaning machines have got four baskets or baths. So you've got to be sort of make your decision as to what is clean. And that, of course, is a lifetime philosophical study. One thing to kind of help with that is I would say that it's useful to differentiate between working and non-working surfaces. So this thing, for instance, it's a bit like the part of the chassis of a car. It just holds the dial in place. So absolute cleanliness isn't as important, say, for instance, as it would be if it were a bearing hole, where you would want to get it cleaner. Anyway, you will see how we go on. And again, in the live chat, love to know what you think. Anyway, so that is how we're going to clean it. We'll crack on with that in a minute. Again, we'll put, I just want to photograph it before we get on to that. So I'll have to break in a minute. And then we've got here our horological brush collection. So I thought as good a time as any to go through the brushes and talk about them for 5 minutes. That's what this program is about. So the first one I come across is an artist brush. It's an Omega Italian-made natural bristle brush. And the really good thing about this is the ferrule is string, or it's got covering of string on it, so it doesn't scratch metal. Really important if you're ever working in a kind of conservation heritage environment, that the ferrule on a brush is covered, otherwise it can easily scratch metal. So this is really useful, but I don't use this for washing. I use this for sort of vacuuming dust. We'll use it, in fact, when we come to the seat board of the clock. So this is your probably the most useful brush in horology. This is what they call a Glasgow brush. I don't know whether I don't think it's to do with the place. I think it's like a brand name, but anyway, Glasgow. And the Glasgow brush is absolutely brilliant. It's just the right tool for the job. The handle is a really good length. The handle is beechwood, natural bristles, and they range from number 4, if I can find one, which has got goat hair, and it's Still smells like goat, believe it or not, which is the softest one. So this is a kind of watch brush through 3, 2, and I think this is probably a number 1. It's as you can see, it's a lot stiffer, but again, natural bristle. So if you're going to start somewhere, then I think I've got one with a name on it still. There's one here, look. Don't know if you can see that, but the brand is Pioneer on this one. Same difference, number 2 Glasgow brush. So this is one of our top brushes for washing clock parts. Here's a regular kind of paintbrush with natural bristle again. And you can see that I've taped the ferrule with archival cotton tape, again, to prevent scratching. That's easy to do. This one is one of my all-time favorites washing brushes. It's kind of like a stippling brush. I got it from Axminster Tools, and they sell it under the name Chestnut. Again, I don't know why. Who knows? Anyway, it's called a chestnut brush. I turned it in the lathe to make it a bit more sort of handleable. And I bought this in 2004 or 2005. So I've had really good value out of it. It's getting a bit thin now, but again, it's really good for kind of getting into things. What else do we have here? Got a brass brush, bristle brush. If you buy a brass brush for use on rusted steel, we might use it actually on the false plate. I don't know. We'll see how it goes first. Then I've just bought another one, and I made a mistake here of buying this, which is 6 rows wide. It's too wide really for clock stuff. But be aware that some steel brushes are the bristles, I don't know what they're called in a metal brush, are actually, they're not brass, they're steel, sorry, but they're plated with something that makes them look like brass. Maybe they're plated with brass, and I've seen them sold on the internet as brass brushes and they're not. So beware, get your brush from somewhere like, you know, one of their big material suppliers in this country. There's Walsh, there's Cousins, there's Cooks and the jewelry people, loads of people, but to name a few. So the brass brush is really useful. Sometimes, what else have we got here? I'm looking for the washing out brush. There somewhere, it's just hiding. Not enough brushes in this drawer. That's our problem. Anyway, wherever it is, the washing out brush has got a bone handle. It's a black bristle brush like this, but shorter. And again, it's quite useful. I prefer the Glasgow number 2. You can kind of get a grip of it more. And then the last one I'm looking for, I've seen it today, so I know it's there somewhere. It's here, look. And that is the fiberglass pencil brush. So the really important, just get that camera out of the way, really important point of principle here is that when we're cleaning a clock, we go from the least or relatively least interventive process possible. So in this case of washing, it's just washing with that Glasgow brush. And we have, as we said last week, in our mind, a kind of end point that we want to get to. But we don't go in there first with the big guns. We work up to that. We work up to that end point. So we try a bit. We say, have we gone far enough yet? We try a bit more. Again, this is a really important principle of conservative practice. You move up to a point. Again, the idea of the approach to the object rather than going straight in there with some kind of standard way of doing it. So we might go Glasgow brush. We might go with a brass bristle brush on steel or iron work. And then eventually, if there's something like a rusty pinion, for instance, and we want to get a bit more rust off, we might work at that with a scalpel or even with a fiberglass pencil brush. Now, if you're using a fiberglass pencil brush, they're really scratchy. So absolutely minimal use, and use it with thick nitrile gloves, because otherwise the fiberglass gets in your fingers, and use it under or in liquid like the white spirits, otherwise the bristles break off and they end up inside your lungs, which is not particularly pleasant. So the it looks like the washing out brush has eluded us for the time being. Maybe it'll appear later on when we get round to washing. So there we are. We're going to wash once in paraffin for the false plate. Then we're going to rinse again in paraffin. Now I'm going to use the fume hood for this. So two things there. One is that you'll be seeing it through the fume hood, so you may not be able to see much at all. I apologize for that. And secondly, there'll also be the noise of the fume extractor running as well. So, so there you go. Maybe it's going to be really dull. In fact, the whole process of cleaning, kind of once you've seen one thing, you've seen them all. But before I get into it, I've got another thing to show you, and that's our drying media. Just move our brushes. So this is our drying media. Ta-da! There's the, there's the washing out brush. It was hiding in the maze. So this is traditionally jewelers, watchmakers, clockmakers would have used dried boxwood sawdust as their drying media. So this isn't by any means essential, but sorry, I'm going to move a microphone, which is bad practice. Sorry about that. So this isn't by any means essential, but once you've washed your object or components in white spirits or paraffin in this case, then rather than air drying, we put them in this drying media, which is maize. It's the husk of a corn cob. So once you've eaten your corn on the cob, it's the bit that you would normally throw away. It's used for shot blasting. They probably feed it to cows and things. I don't know. But it's one of those things that they've managed to sell a kind of throwaway or a byproduct. So good on them. And the good thing about the maize, as opposed to the boxwood sawdust, is it's relatively dust-free. It's still a bit dusty. And if you've got the luxury of a drying oven, so this is a bit like an incubator, then it's really great to have the stuff sort of kept slightly warm. That's a real luxury for a workshop if you're looking to buy some to have warm maize. This, by the way, is sold under the brand Grit O Cobs. I think it's GRIT-O-K-O-B-S. But there's loads of different makes. You buy it in bags off the internet. So there we are. So we found our washing out brush. This one has got a bone handle. The modern ones, I think, have got plastic handles, of course, and they've got these natural bristle brushes. So this is really, really good. But as I say, I think Glasgow #2 brush is actually probably just as useful. So once we've washed and then rinsed our component, I'm going to put it in here, allow it to dry a bit, brush off the cobs, and then put the whole thing, again, if you've got a drying oven, that's really useful. With that false plate, we're going to probably cover it in Renaissance wax and microcrystalline wax or something. So anyway, I'm just going to photograph the false plate before we clean it. So you'll see me working on that. Move that down a little bit. You remember from last week, we've got our photographic scale, which we're going to carry over. I know we're not, because it's got last week's date on it, so I'm going to have to find a new one. There we are. We are watching AHS as well. I haven't seen the swan yet. So just out of interest, if anybody's interested, this is actually, obviously I wouldn't be talking out loud, but this is broadly the process I would go through when I was repairing a long case clock. For those of you that follow us on Facebook, this week we've been working on a client clock and doing pretty much the same thing. So the date today is the 11th. That's right. Again, it seems like a bit of a faff making these photographic scales, but believe me, they're absolutely worth the weight in gold. If you're trying to find a picture 4, 5, 10 years later on, really, really useful. It takes a few minutes, but there you go. There we are. So I've just taken a couple of snaps of the false plate. Just in terms of condition, if we were condition reporting this, it seems in good nick. There are often these, or sometimes they're cracked, and you'll see they've been repaired by riveting and so on, because they are cast iron. Now, in terms of cleaning, it's got some paint splatter and things on it. I'm not bothered about that. It's not doing any harm. It's not going anywhere. All I want to do really is to knock off the spider's webs and maybe a little bit of the surface rust. And as I say, we can go on from there. So we'll have a little bit of a change around here because I want to get that in there. So bear with us. So you're sharing the view with me now. I'll try and stand at the side because the arm from our extraction is in the way, but there we are. That's how it has to be. So I can work under there. Yep, great. I'm going to change gloves and put our extractor on. So I apologize if I'll try and move the microphone a bit closer. I apologize if I disappear now sound-wise, but we're going to put our slightly stronger gloves on. Just you'll probably be able to hear the extractor running. So you'll see here almost immediately that we've got quite a lot of dirt coming off the false plate. So I'm just going to work around just brushing. And this way of cleaning, it's quite time consuming, but the great thing is that it allows you to really look at the object. You often, it's quite meditative, but you often see things, apart from the name of the false plate, of course, which I've never really taken much notice of. Let's put it this way. I think there are many people in horology who are interested in the history of objects, but regrettably, I'm not one of them. Any questions? No? Yeah. It is. Yeah, Baker. Yeah. It's actually, now the false plate's wet with the paraffin, it's actually quite easy to read the name. Yeah, it's Wilkes. I don't know if it's Wilkes and Baker or Wilkes Baker, but there you go. Ooh. Oh, nice. Well, so we've got one of our Facebook group people with us tonight by the sound of it, which is brilliant. So thank you so much. Who's interested in the history of these things as well. So filling us in as we go along. And apparently this combination of makers, Wilkes and Baker, were only together for 5 years, all together in business for 5 years. I don't know which 5 years they were. Do we know? Brilliant. So 1815 to 1820, which is what we thought for the clock, but it's nice to have it pinned down a little bit. You can see the dirt there coming off the false plate. I'll just introduce you to another one of my cleaning favorites. That is the archival cotton tape. It's incredibly useful. For instance, if we wanted to clean in these holes, I don't in particular, but if it was when we get on to doing the movement frame and we want to clean inside the great wheel arbor holes, barrel arbor holes, then archival cotton tape is really good for that. And here behind this spring, I just want to get a bit more in there that I can't with my brush. So I'm going to grab a bit of archival tape. You can see there, just using the tape to clean behind the spring. Really useful. Just kind of sewing that. So what's the consensus then on whether this clock ever had, whether that 24-hour will? Are there other 8-day duration clocks like this type with a false plate where the date work like this was there but wasn't used? Certainly there are with center second, with subsidiary seconds dials, because the clock we worked on today had a extended front pivot for an escape wheel, but no hole in the dial. I've seen that quite a few times, but I don't know about this arrangement with the how much is this from me enough from the it's coming to its own well. There we are. So we've kind of been over this. It's a little bit more awkward cleaning today with the having to film as well, but that's fine. And you can see here the kind of dirt that we've got in the bottom of the tray. So I'm going to change to a new tray now and a new brush and give this a rinse. Probably I'll just do one rinse, but let's see how it goes.
So the sound is good.
Playing with the thing off. Yeah. Who's that? So we've got a clean brush and a clean tray and a bit more paraffin. And I'm going to give this a rinse. Now, I can save you the pain of watching the rest of the cleaning of the clock, which is going to take ages, because it's all kind of the same, really. I'm just looking, taking some photographs, cleaning and rinsing, but I am going to do it all live, so you won't miss anything if you can bear to watch it. Yeah, we've got some. If you can see that we've got some paint splats there, but I'm not bothered about that. They're not doing any harm, and you know, who knows? They're a little bit of the history of the object, I suppose. Now we get a lot of questions. In fact, in our book, I think we mention ultrasonic cleaning and why, you know, I don't want to use ultrasonic cleaning for cleaning a clock anyway. And that's because it doesn't discriminate, basically. A, I don't know what the heck it's doing. And B, it doesn't discriminate with things that need attention and things that don't. Now, this is pretty uniformly kind of dirty and a bit oily and things. So we can just kind of gently wash away at it. But if you have a movement plate, often you'll find there are areas that need more attention than the others. And any process where you leave it to a machine, as it were, I haven't got enough confidence in that to know that it's cleaning where I want it to clean. And also I would be concerned about the ultrasonic action having a detrimental effect on the object as well. Now, there may be people watching this who are perfectly confident with that they know about ultrasonics, how they work, what the risks are, and so on. Okay, so you can see our rinse. It's got a little bit dirty, but I probably actually wouldn't bother rinsing this again. As I say, it's a non-working object. We've got the spider's webs off. We've got the most of the oil off and things. So now I'm going to put it in the drying media, and I'm going to disappear again for a couple of minutes as it goes off to our drying oven. So bear with me again. So that's gone in the drying media, and it'll stay in there for a short while. You just heard that clock striking. The bell is touching the wall, which is why it sounds so funny. The good thing about the drying oven, again, it's like an incubator heat. It means that when we get this false plate out, which we'll actually do in about half an hour maybe, it'll be warm enough that when we put our Renaissance wax on, our microcrystalline wax, it kind of melts and goes into the surface. So if you've got something like an old, one of those wall, like a turret clock, sorry, but a wall clock, or something that's really pitted, maybe an old lantern clock or something, then you can get that wax in the sort of pits that are being caused by corrosion and help to stave off further corrosion. Anyway, so I'm going to disappear again for a couple of minutes, and then we will look at some repairs. I'll just put them over that so they can. I'll leave that there so there's something to look at. No. About an hour. The used paraffin, by the way, is really useful. I keep it, if you've got somewhere safe to store it, again, don't decant into an unlabeled vessel or anything. Always have it in its proper vessel or label it again. But if you've got somewhere to store it, it's actually really useful for things like either you've got a really graunchy object for a first sort of rough wash, or cleaning your back chain or something like that. It's really good. Anyway, I'm just going to decant ours. And then we will begin to look at some repairs. Once the brushes are finished with them, by the way, I clean them in a kind of eco washing powder. I think that's the best thing, or washing up liquid. The most Sure Care is a good brand that just cleans the brushes out, leave them to dry, and then they're ready for next time. Right. Well, that's got our chemicals out of the way for the time being, and our false plate is drying. We'll go back to it before we log off this evening, and hopefully you've been having a little look at our movement. So as we go along, the good way of, again, cleaning like this, if you've got the time, is that it allows you to take the thing in terms of in terms of thinking, what am I going to need? Do I need any materials? What bushing am I going to do? And so on. Now, I've just seen here something interesting. So I'll point that out before we go on to the pendulum and deciding what to do there. See the HS ones. Right. Okay. Keep banging my head on that thing. Right. So what I've noticed here, we just move our camera back, is that the rack spring, as is often the case, looks like it's got soft soldered repair. So what that means, I don't know, but it has got a soft soldered repair. Looks to work okay, which is more than I can say for a lot of replacement rack springs that are too strong. While I'm on the subject, the problem with the replacement rack spring that's too strong is that as the rack arm falls onto the steps of the snail, it breaks the joint here eventually, and then you get all sorts of problems. So this rack spring should only be enough. So here's something for you to be thinking about until we get around to fixing this, is because of the way that the rack spring repair here looks, and again, I'll take some better photographs and post them on Instagram at some point. Do you want to change it? Because some people might say that it's bad practice, whoever did this. I personally don't mind. It's, as from what I can see anyway, it's not dangerous, so it's not going to damage the clock more, and importantly, it's not going to damage you or your clients more. There's not going to be no accident probably caused by this repair. Yeah, you could argue that it's ugly or unsightly, but it's functional from what I can see. So do we replace it? Do we repair it? Do we get the solder off? I don't know. I'd love to know what you think though, so please let us know in the live chat. Anyway, the only reason we looked at our movement today was to find out the name of the maker on the false plate, so mission accomplished there. As I said before, we're going to put this to one side and we're going to start by looking at things that need repair. So I'm going to have to move the microphone again. Need one of those rather nice boom stands that comes down from the ceiling. Anyway, one day. So here's our pendulum bob. Now, there's a question last week about the material that the bob's made out of. It is cast iron, believe me, and maybe that'll look better again when we've got the thing repaired. Now, normally I would take this apart and wash it straight away, but we've done that for this evening, so you can imagine that the same process is just going to take place with the pendulum bob and the weight. So what I'll do next week is I'll jump straight in with that without any further explanation and just get on with it. We've got more interesting things to be doing for the next, I don't know, half hour or something like that. And one of those interesting things is, what do we do about this repair here? The pendulum rod's broken. But before that, yeah, I probably mentioned last week that there's a problem or a potential problem here. Now, this isn't any fault of the clock or any previous repair, but it's just a kind of user-based kind of thought that if you fix this clock, you take it back to a client, you give them a rating sheet for making the thing run faster or slower, and they can't do it easily because you can't really get your fingers in there. That's quite awkward. The bob moves up and down, or should I say the slide moves up and down quite nicely, so that's not a problem. Do be really, this again, going back to my point earlier, it's really much better to get all this stuff dealt with. You know, I see so many clocks, and I, you know, I've done it myself in the past. The pendulum and making that work well, suspension spring, rating nut, and so on, is really a critical part of a repair, in my view. There's no point in repairing the clock and then not being able to regulate it. It's just doesn't make sense. So what I would suggest here is that at some point, I haven't quite thought through what it's going to look like yet, but we just basically make a brass spacing piece here. In fact, I'd just probably do that, just effectively a kind of thick washer that just sets the rating nut off from the bottom of the pendulum bob by about 1/8 of an inch, so about 3 or 4 millimeters. Now, I won't try and patinate that or anything. It'll be quite obvious that it's later, and at some point in the future, if somebody doesn't like it, they can chuck it away. Now, if this were a regulator, we might not have that amount of adjustment to allow us to do that, and B, there would be probably marks on the pendulum bob relating to the rod where the thing has been set in the past. So that might make that kind of improvement, if you like, rather different. However, in this case, so the first thing I look for here is the rating thread nut stripped? Will the client be able to rate the clock easily? And the answer here is the thread's a little bit wobbly, but it's fine. It works right to the end. Although saying that, it does look like the thread has been broken off at some point. Normally they come to a bit of a point, and as you can see, it's a little bit bent there at the end, but you can actually screw the nut right down. So I'm pretty happy with that. And the second point is, let's just take the nut off. Oh, that's interesting. So sometimes the nut on posher clocks normally has got graduations on it, and it goes one way up or the other. In this case, and I don't quite know why, it has it has that line cut across it. I've got no idea what that is, but maybe this nut isn't anything to do with the pendulum. Maybe it's of something else and somebody's fitted it on there. So that might be a problem if the thread doesn't work, but if the thread works fine, and we've got enough work on with this clock not to go looking for problems. So I would say this is safe. It's not going to damage the clock. It's not going to damage the client. It's not going to result in personal injury. Is it ugly? I'm not going to make a decision about that. I'm going to leave it. It seems perfectly fine and perfectly functional to me. So what I'll do is I'll take it across in a minute and take a photograph of it. So we've got record of that. And then importantly, let's look at the slide. Again, there's no point in fixing your clock if it can't be regulated. Often the slide will only go one way around, or it'll only move far enough anyway, one way around. So let's just try it. Let's just take it out, turn it round. Yeah, it goes a lot further in that way around. Now, whether that's the way it was originally, we may never know. There may be some marks on here when we get to cleaning it that help us identify which way around it was. Yeah, I think it's reasonable to say that it went that way around, because that's the way that you get maximum amount of rating thread available. Okay, so we're pretty happy with that. We're going to wash this bob in exactly the same way we did with the false plate. And remember that cotton tape that we used behind the date wheel spring? I'm going to feed that through the body of this and work it backwards and forwards to clean out the center, because often you'll find that there's a bit of oil gotten into there, and it makes the slide and the bob sticky. So if the client wants to make the clock run faster, that's not a problem because the bob will move up. But when they come to regulate it to make the clock run slower, the rating nut comes down, the bob stays in the same place, and the client rings you up and says, we can't regulate the clock. Or worse, they let the nut right down and then the bob falls down and it breaks the suspension spring. So this needs to be nice and loose. We can see it's a bit rusty, but we're going to deal with that later on. So here's the challenge. You can see that the pendulum rod has broken off. So we need to photograph that probably as well. I might not. No, I will do that now. I will do that now before we try and get it out. So let's just get the other end of that arrangement, the actual pendulum rod, and begin to think about what we're going to do there in terms of a repair. You probably already got it sorted out in your own mind. So please let us know what you would do in the live chat. The AHS woman's going for it. Normally the extractor hood is out of the way. I keep whacking my head on it. So here's our pendulum rod. Now you may remember from last week or from the Instagram images that the rod has been bent round to fit in the cardboard box that the clock came in. That's fine, actually. These rods, not that you would actively want to do that, but it's mild steel. It's got a bit of paint on it, which is nice. It's mild steel, so it'll straighten up again with a bit of banging. Now the top end, I think, is fine. Let's just, here we are. So here's our pendulum top block. Let's just check that thread. Now, interesting to note here that on these pendulum rods, there's only a few turns of thread, and that thread's quite short and a bit tapered. So when the top block or bottom block goes in, the thread almost completely disappears. It's a telltale sign for a later element of the pendulum if you can see a lot of visible thread. So there we are. And remember, we've already determined this clock was made in the 1820s.
1815 to 1820.
1815 to 1820. So that's before British Association or BA was introduced. So this is probably a non-standardized thread. It'd be interesting to see. But anyway, we can see that our top block is great. So we don't have to worry about that other than cleaning. And of course, other than the fact the suspension spring's broken off. So we've got work ahead of us. But the other end, again, kinked round. I don't know if you can see there, but the thing is broken off like that. Okay, so we don't know yet whether we have got enough material there to extend the rod, or whether we could get away with shortening it by tapping a new thread. But I want to see if I can somehow save this thing. I don't quite know how I'm going to do that yet. And this is not a problem. The rod end is easy because at worst comes to the worst, we can either put a sleeve on there or we can tap a new thread on. I don't really want to do that, but there are options. And remember, we're interested in options. So our challenge is this end. Because as you can see, if this were straight, that would not be a problem. We can grab hold of this, put a bit of paraffin on, and we can get the thing out and hopefully make a new bit or fix it onto the old bit. But the problem is it's got bent. And if you look at the thread, I don't know, again, what you can see there. probably can't get that close. Now the camera's decided to flip. Anyway, slightly disconcertingly, the camera's now decided to flip, but you can see that the thread is damaged here. So the challenge there is if we try and straighten it, is it going to break off? So it's easier to straighten it while it's in the slide because I can get hold of it easier. Once it's out of the slide, I'm really not going to be able to straighten it. But if I straighten it in the slide and it breaks off, then I've had it because there'll be a bit broken off in the slide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it out of the slide first to have a look. But that'll give us an opportunity to make sure that when we thread it back in to straighten it, that we that if it does break off, we can get the thing out at the end. Whereas if it's rusted in there and we break it off, we're going to have to start drilling it, which is going to be tricky. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes out to photograph this stuff, photograph the rating nut, the pendulum bob, the top block, and the slide. Then I'll come back and we'll start trying to get that threaded piece out of there. But again, if you've got suggestions of otherwise, there are always many ways to repair these things, and there is no right or wrong way to repair a clock. We're all here, I hope, to learn to develop our practice and to get new ideas off people. So I'm going to just stand across here now and do a bit of photography because I don't want to lose this opportunity. It's all so easy to think I'll come back to that, but of course one forgets. Right, okay. Back to this little challenge. So I suppose the first thing to do is just really quickly see if that piece of metal in there is already loose. It may be, we might be in luck. I've got a suspicion that it won't be, but anyway, so I'll just move over to the vise. Yeah. Get the camera to upright again. There we are. It's better. And is it going to focus? Yeah. So with our soft jaws in the vise, it's all quite rough and ready. With our soft jaws in the vise, let's just see if that piece of material is already loose. It's not going to grip much, obviously, but you never know your luck. Now, I could just put a bit of paraffin on this, again, to act as a bit of penetrating oil. That would, oops, that would help. Yeah, I'll do that. I'm just going to put a bit of thin oil on it just to try and help it out a little bit. Now, obviously, ideally, you would leave that overnight or something. You could actually, I don't really want to start setting fire to it now, but you could heat it as well with a bit of gas if you've got extraction or you're working outside or something. I think my next, I'm going to just give it a couple of minutes. My next line of attack, again, working on that principle of starting with the least interventive kind of approach and then moving forward. My next line of attack is to get a pair of brass lined pliers on the thing. Again, I don't want to damage the thread if I can help it, but I'm just going to have one more go with these jaws and then go for the brass line pliers.
Derek said that he would make a new rod because he wouldn't trust it with a piece of whatever you do to repair it. He wouldn't trust it with a piece of heavy cast iron hanging on it. Oh, okay.
So we've had somebody on the live chat say that they would actually prefer to make a new rod because of whatever repair you do wouldn't be trustworthy. And that's a really good point. You do have to, like everything, conservation's a risk analysis process, particularly something like weights or a pendulum. or so on. So I'll absolutely keep that in mind. For me, I would try and do everything I can to retain as much original or early material as possible. But there are absolutely cases if you do have to have the clock running where it might be that you want to make a new component. Now that's normally something like a ratchet click or a click spring or something like that that's worn or damaged or broken or something. So thank you for that. We'll keep that in mind, and we will we'll keep our options open. Personally, I think we're going to be okay here. Now, the problem with this is, of course, some people out there may well say, well, by now, Matthew, I could have already gone online, ordered a new pendulum and fitted it. The problem with that is, and there's no problem with it per se, is the kind of work, if you want to work in the heritage or sort of museums domain, is that you can't get that work if that's your kind of philosophy. And there's nothing wrong with the philosophy, it's just a different thing. So for me, I have to be and want to be seen to kind of be very be conservative or trying to preserve as much original as possible. And what it's going to mean here, I think, is a repair that some people would say looks ugly, because I think I'm probably going to sleeve this, and yeah, let's see how it goes. But great that you're thinking out loud, and keep that coming. Yeah, so this is really rusted in here. It's super tight. I think the kind of sensible thing to do is to actually leave it for a few days in penetrating oil, and just see if that helps us out a little bit for next week, because I'd really like to explore this as much as I can within reason. Because remember, this whole project here with this clock, it's a learning exercise for us and for you, and it's an interaction, and it's a stimulus for discussion and debate. So we might not be going down the route that we would given we were working commercially, although even commercially, I would soak up some of that time and try and get this out of there. And it's really satisfying when that happens. But anyway, I'm going to give it one last shot now. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to put it in penetrating oil, and we will revisit next week. As the saying goes, never ever use an adjustable spanner, but here we go. So there we are. We got it out. Can't really see in the end. Camera won't focus. So we got the little stud part of it out, and that's really where I wanted to get to, because now when I thread it in to try and straighten it again, I know that at least if it breaks off, I'll be able to get it out again, which seems a little bit crazy. So again, I'll take some photographs and put them on the Instagram page. Seems to be big. A little bit gloomy down there, I'm afraid. But anyway, so there we are. Really pleased about that. So at least if the worst comes to the worst, we've got our hole here, and we can match the thread. We can try with a sort of standard thread, maybe an 1/8 Whitworth or something like that. But I've got a feeling that this was made before those standardized threads. So we may be lucky and we can match this, but otherwise we'll have to make a thread on the end of the rod, or as Derek, was it?
Yeah.
As Derek said, we can just get a new rod, a bit of 1/8" mild steel. So sorry about that being out of focus there. So really pleased with that. That was worth a little bit of perseverance. Often these things work out okay. So there we go. Right, I think that's maybe it for tonight. I'm just going to go back to the false plate and just show you putting the wax on, because then we can wrap that in acid-free paper. We can label it up and we can forget about it for however long it takes until the rest of the clock is ready. With this, it's still dubious as to whether it's going to straighten up or not. But I'm giving it some thought. Maybe we could make a little piece with a plug on there. Now, I don't have a lathe big enough here to do that. Otherwise, that might be an option to make a little stepped piece. But anyway, keep thinking about it and we'll come back to that next week. So and I'll photograph that. That goes apart. So I'm going to rush off now again, retrieve our false plate from the drying oven, and I'm going to put some Renaissance wax on, some microcrystalline wax, and we're going to then brush it, wrap it up for the next few weeks until we're ready to use it, knowing that it's safe and cleaned. Fine. Yeah. Right, so there's our false plate. And as you can see, that most of that rust was surface rust, and even that light brushing, it's kind of knocked some of that off. And what's left, you can see that there's still a little bit of rusting, but I'm not particularly bothered about that. So let's just get rid of that. Now, we don't have our thermal imaging camera here, so you'll have to trust me that this is just kind of hand hot. I think it's been at about 50 degrees. So I'm just going to brush those cobs away. And with the maize, you do have to be a bit careful if you're cleaning, or if you're drying wheel teeth. Sometimes the maize is just the right size to get stuck in the wheel teeth, and it can cause a bit of a problem. But again, that's really why the drying oven is brilliant, because it kind of dehydrates it. So we can see there, much nicer. Now we can see the signature, and just check that the style feet are solid, which they are. A little bit of corrosion on the brass, but absolutely happy with that. So leaning over, rather. There it is. Sort of impossible to have everything at hand. Anyway, what I was looking for was my Renaissance wax, which is a microcrystalline wax, a paraffin-based wax. Developed this particular one in association with the British Museum. So it's a non-yellowing wax, and it's incredibly useful for things like this. So before this cools down entirely, what I'm going to do is just get rid of some of that from there. Cover the false plate in wax. I'll just get a bit on there. And you'll see, because the false plate is warm, the wax melts. It's got quite a low kind of, I think they call it glass transition temperature. I'm just going to cover the false plate in microcrystalline wax. And this will provide it with a bit of a barrier. I mean, the reality is that in most modern properties, domestic houses, the heating is pretty vicious and the relative humidity is quite low. So rusting like we see on old objects, unless of course it's something like a turret clock, or that we know the clock is going to be on the seafront and Brighton or something, is pretty unheard of. So let's just quickly carry around here. And because the metal is already warm, the white spirit base for this wax is evaporating quite quickly. Just cover it. Quite happy with that. So now we're going to take another number 2 Glasgow brush, another clean one. So you need an army of these things. I need a lockdown hair, unlockdown haircut as well. So I would wait a little bit longer till this has dried more, but just for the sake of this evening's session, once the wax has dried, then I'm going to brush off any excess, basically. And again, this is a nice part of the process because it enables you to really take in what you've done, your thinking, and I'm thinking about the conversation now about the pendulum rod, of course, and that's brilliant that we can consider our next steps, so we're not wasting time. Love this brass spring here, really nicely kind of patinated, like that a lot. Right. Okay. So if you remember back to last week, we gave objects a numbering system. So this object, or this component, should I say, of the main object, because it's not going to go back together for a few weeks, it's really important that we label it. So I'm going to put one of our tie-on labels on it. So with whatever happens, somebody else could come along and they'll find this and they'll know which object it fits with and what date we worked on it, which I think is really important. So I'm going to tie a label on it, and then I'm going to wrap it in acid-free tissue paper for storage, which we have somewhere. We might have to show you that next week. Some new stuff just arrived today. So I'm going to wrap it in acid-free tissue to prevent it from getting dusty again. I'm going to label it, and then I'm going to tie it up and put that away. And, you know, I think that's quite nice because it's one thing off our list. When the movement's finished, whenever that is, we know we don't have to start worrying about the dial, or there isn't that temptation, maybe even worse, to fit that false plate. You might just think, oh, I'll just put the dial on. And you saw all those spiders' webs and old grease and things on there, dust and dirt. And so you don't have to worry about that. That's when we put it back together, nice clean false plate's going to go on there, clean dial's going to go on that. The hands are going to be, well, the hands don't even exist. That's another story. And it'll be done. So there we are. So those components, false plate, weights, pendulum bob, pendulum top block, pendulum slide, we can clean them all in that way. And that's what I'm going to be doing next week. So it's not going to be the most exciting thing to watch. And in the meantime, I'm going to be thinking about that repair for our pendulum bob slide where the rods got broken off. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to the team here who've been doing the live chat. Thank you for chatting, and we will see you next week. If you're watching this video live or you see the recording of it, then remember that you can keep up with us on our Facebook page during the week, and at some point we'll be posting more videos on our other channel as well. So as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much.
Just stay on for a second.
We have to close down. Are we to log off, Rich? Yeah.